last week started in our class that we were going to forego the opening song at least through the rest of this study so that we get about 5 more minutes of class time in our study, just simply to help with that so that we don't have to quite rush so much. Just to note, we've got a handout again for tonight with some things. I do want to spend some time at the end of class on the lessons from Joseph's life on the bottom, so we want to make sure we get through everything during our time doing that. But on the back we have our weekly word search, and this week's word search winner was Lois. What's that? Yeah, but not in Genesis 37 through 50. Yes, Lois is in the Bible, but her name is in Acts and in the Timothy's. But anyway, she's the one that got picked this week. And just to remind you what I mean by that being the weekly winner, if you show to me on Sunday a finished word search, I take the names down and then I put you in a drawing, and whoever's name I pick out to win the drawing, I put their name in the puzzle for the next week. So that's how we're doing it. So anyway, last week was Caden DeSellums, and who knows, it might be your name next week. So just show me a completed one on Sunday, and I'll put you in the drawing for the next week. Just give something fun. I know some of you don't do these, and that's okay. The lesson's by far more important. But if you have an interest in the puzzle, just something of interest that people can do. We are tonight in lesson 4 in our books. And, this lesson tonight is, I believe, probably going to be one of our favorite ones of the whole study, largely because Joseph's story is so fantastic. Joseph is one of the very few characters, and the author mentions it in the chapter, one of the very few characters there's nothing bad said about. There's very few people that fit that category. Obviously, our sinless Savior, Jesus, there's nothing bad written about him. But it's very few people that are listed as not having done anything wrong. Now, I'm sure that Joseph wasn't a sinless individual, and we know that. But there's about 13 chapters about him, and there's nothing negative said about what he did. The only other person I can really think of that has a similar amount of things written about them that there isn't really anything negative about, and that is Samuel. Samuel, there's nothing said about him, and there's nothing also, I think, about Joshua. But for the most part, most everybody has one fault or another that finds its way into Scripture. So, anyway, Joseph, as we know, was one of the sons of Jacob. He was the 11th of 12 sons. But he was Jacob's favorite because he was the oldest son of Rachel. And we looked last week at all of the sons of Jacob and where they fit in. And the outline last week had who their mother was and all the things associated with that. And so we saw that at the end of last week's lesson. And Joseph was the one that was the oldest of Rachel's. And so because of that, Jacob made him his favorite son. And that's a bad move. Anytime you pick favorites of children, it's bad. And especially when there's 12 of them and you have a clear favorite, it only brings about problems. And so it did. And Joseph, as we know in the early part of his story, and that he had some dreams. Do you remember the 2 dreams that Joseph had? What did they amount to? What were the dreams? One of them was of sheaves in a field, and his sheaf stood tall, and all the other sheaves, which his brothers represented, they all bowed down to his. Right, the sun, the moon, and stars, and they all bowed down to his star. The interpretation of both of those dreams was that his brothers, and then even his father, his family, would all bow down to him in honor to him. Now, if you had a brother that said that to you with a straight face, what would you have done? Probably put a knot on his head. Somebody would have gotten thumped. Either you would have thumped him or you'd have gotten thumped doing it. One of the two, it would have happened. And so it didn't play very well on his brothers either. And it was even worse because there were 10 of them and they were all older. They were all more experienced than him. Well, we know how the story goes, that Jacob one time sends Joseph off to check on his brothers, goes and finds them. Well, when they see him coming a ways off, they grab hold of him and throw him in a pit. They want to kill him first of all, but they decide, hey, no, why don't we get a little bit of money out of him? Besides, after all, he is our brother. And so, what's that? And Reuben was going to pull him out of the pit and save him. Well, for whatever reason, Reuben was gone for a little while, and the other brothers pull him out and sell him. They sell him to some Ishmaelite traders that are coming through. And if you remember, the Ishmaelites would have been, I guess you could say, distant cousins of theirs, because their grandfather, the sons of Jacob, their grandfather was Isaac. And Isaac's brother was Ishmael. And so these are descendants of their great uncle. Okay? So these would be, second, third cousins that are coming by. So this is kind of family. Well, if they were really nice family, they might not have bought the brother. But they sell the brother. Take him to Egypt. He goes down to Egypt, and you remember who, when he's sold into slavery, who it is that buys him? Who? Potiphar. Potiphar buys him, and you remember what Potiphar's job was? He was the captain of the guard. And if I understand that correctly, and what I've seen on that, he essentially would be what we would think of as the secret service for the Pharaoh. The captain of the guard would be in charge of security for the king, as in the Pharaoh. And so, basically, this is an individual that wields great power in the kingdom. Being the captain of the guard would be, very close and dear to Pharaoh himself. And so around the highest ranking officials of the government. So he took care of his household. And we know that he did well at that until, Potiphar's wife decides that she wants to seduce him. And we know how that turns out. How does that turn out? She tries to grab him one day, and what happens? He runs, and when he runs, his coat gets left by her. And she decides, well, this isn't going to happen. And so she lies and says that he tried to seduce her, which was the exact opposite of what really had happened. Potiphar throws him into prison. I think it maybe even says something about Potiphar, that Potiphar didn't have him killed. I think it maybe says something about his character, and he recognized maybe, all things considered, Joseph had done right by him, even though he believed that lie about what Joseph had done. And so we know that Joseph ends up in prison, and while in prison, there are two individuals that have dreams. Do you remember who they were? Cupbearer and a baker. In the King James, the cupbearer is called a butler. And so basically that's what that amounts to. The cupbearer in ancient times, what they would do is not only they brought the cup to the king, but they would take a sip before they gave it to him. You know why that is? Make sure it wasn't poisoned. That's a great gig if you have a good king. If everybody loves the king, that's a good job. But if everybody wants to kill the king, that could be a dangerous job. So, it all depends, But being a cupbearer could potentially be a pretty good gig. Well, we know that those two individuals, they had different interpretations. The baker, his interpretation said what? He's going to die. He's going to be hung in 3 days. The butler, what was his interpretation? 3 days he'd be restored to his position. And so Joseph says to him, hey, remember me when you get out of here. Well, how did he do with that? He didn't. Till 2 years later. And Pharaoh has a dream. 2 dreams, in fact, in one night. Has a dream about 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows and 7 plump ears of grain and 7 skinny ears of grain. Can't figure it out. None of his wise men can figure it out. And the butler goes, oh yeah. Well, yeah, I know a guy. Yeah. You know, I don't know if it was said quite like that, but that's essentially what it amounted to. Oh yeah, I know what I should have done. And he says, there was a young man, a Hebrew, that he was he was in prison with us. And he told us what was going to happen, and it happened exactly the way that he said. And Pharaoh said, get him. They clean him up, bring him in before Pharaoh, and he says, Pharaoh says, I've got a dream. I want you to give me the answer. And I just love Joseph's answer. Remember what Joseph told him? God's going to tell you, God's going to give me the interpretation, or give the interpretation to Pharaoh. And so what a great answer that was. Well, he does. He says it's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and you better get ready. And he tells him how to do it. He says, save 20% of what you've got and tax the people 20% of what they get in this abundance. And you store all that grain, and you sit on it for that 7 years. When that 7 years is up, then you start giving it back to the people, and then you also have those from other nations that will come and give that back to them. And so they do that. Potiphar says, that's a great idea. We need to do that, and we need somebody wise and discerning, and obviously you're the man for the job. And Pharaoh gives him that job. And on our outline, one of the things I have listed there is that Pharaoh changes Joseph's name. Now, we'll always still call him Joseph, because the name he gives him is Zaphanath-Paneah. That's kind of fun to say, but I won't ask you to do that. But he changes his name to that. He does so in Genesis 41 and 45. He gives to him a young lady, Asenath, to be his wife, who is the daughter of the priest of On. And from there, Joseph has a wife and has a position. And the Pharaoh gives him the job of being in charge of gathering this grain. And he gives him a position. The text does not call him this, but I believe in essence the author of the book, I think, gets it right. The author in the book calls him a prime minister. And I don't have any problem with that. It doesn't say that specifically, but clearly that's what he is. He is in charge of the nation in every way except for the throne itself. And so Joseph is going to be in charge of everything in Egypt except for the throne. Now I want you to notice that Joseph always has a way to rise to the top. All 3 of the situations Joseph found himself in Egypt. When Joseph was put into Potiphar's house, what did he do? He did exceptionally well. God was with him. And all of Potiphar's house prospered. In fact, it wasn't long till Potiphar handed the whole household over to Joseph. And he ran the whole household. When Joseph ended up in prison, remember what happened? He's in prison, and it's not long till the jailer recognizes this guy is something special.